Okay, everybody, this is part 2 of this crash course on graphics. Before I start digging into this, I just want to remind everybody that what I'm doing here is a fast version of what's already available on my website. So for example, if you go to either content or examples or even assignments, you go to examples and you scroll down, there already is all essentially the same stuff here in a slower format. You can go through graphics 1, graphics 2, graphics 3. You can access the code on the GitHub page. All of that's already there, okay? Another option, just to show you guys, I just showed another student this a few minutes ago. You can, and I'm just gonna do this right from Google. If you Google search Mr. Walks YouTube, okay, you get to my YouTube page, which also has links from my website to my YouTube page. You go to, for example, playlists, and then search for, say, Computer Science 30S. You can get a playlist of all the videos of Computer Science 30S. I'll go and take a look at that full playlist. So from the intro to computer science to intro to Java to variables, conditional statements, looping, arrays, classes, and even the graphic stuff in longer video format. Those are also available for you. So what I'm doing in these videos is a real fast version of all of that, okay? But if it's going too quickly for you, you can always backtrack to even more of that optional graphical material. Okay, so as of yesterday, where we were, and let me just make sure I am in fact recording, good. Where we were yesterday was we built this thing, this hello world thing using the editor. But if I hit play right now in this and it goes to Computer Science 30S, it's gonna go to the original version of main. And then eventually it's gonna originally go to learn graphics equals new learn graphics. And by the way, as well, I am updating the code on GitHub for all these examples. So if you go to GitHub, you can get the code. But when it gets to learn graphics and it runs the learn graphics constructor, nothing happens. It just does 2 outputs. Okay? So instead, what I want to do is I want to create a graphics 1 object, because that's what it's called. That's the name of this user interface, or this JFrame thing that I built yesterday. It's called graphics 1. So I'm going to say graphics 1 equals new graphics 1. This is a thing I've created, and when it does this, it's going to jump over to the GUI that I built, and it's going to jump to the code. As a reminder of yesterday, when you use this editor and you use these controls and this cool properties window, to actually access the code, you have to go up here to the corner where it says design and source. Source gets at the source code. So I'm going to now open up the source code of graphics 1. And because it's a designer, it's going to put a bunch of source code in there for you. And again, for those of you who did the Computer Science 20S course, you're used to that. You're used to the visual editor putting a bunch of code in there for you. But part of that code includes a constructor method, which now you have a context for. You understand what that means, knowing both what a method is from the methods unit and a constructor method from the classes unit. And it ends up calling this thing called init, which is short for initialize components, which it also documents is hidden in here. Inside the generated code is where init components hides. That's the code that it writes for you. But that doesn't mean we can't add code to this, which is what I'm about to do. I'm about to add my own code to the constructor method here, okay? All right, so what am I gonna add? Well, I'm just gonna cheat a little bit and put it in a big comment here. So I'm about to add code after the call to the method in the line above. That's this line up here. Do not erase that line. If you erase that line, none of the designer code will work. And I'm going to add a line of code to make this form, or this JFrame, appear to the user. It's a very simple line. This meaning this graphics 1, which is a JFrame using inheritance. You don't have to worry about writing that code. It's done for you by the visual designer. This dot set visible to true. You also don't have to write this method. That method was inherited by from the JFrame class. But anyways, now when I run this, and I want a graphics 1 to be constructed, dramatic pause here, learn graphics, it constructs it and makes it visible. And now you'll also see the animation we found yesterday is actually part of that construction. There's a button there, there's a text box there, there's an image there. All right, so that is a quick way to make a graphics objects appear on the screen. Now, what I'm also now going to do is I'm going to make a graphics 2, but I'm not going to use the visual designer. So instead, I'm just going to add a regular Java class to this project. Right-click New Java Class. Call it Graphics 2. And that won't have any visual editor to it. Graphics 2 is just like every other class or Java project we've made. It's just a place for code. There's no designer here. But that doesn't mean I can't make it also appear on the screen as a JFrame. Because all I have to do is say Graphics 2 extends JFrame. Now, when I did this here, it did it for me. And it added this little part right here for me. Now, I could do that as well, or I could do something you guys are more used to. I can click on the light bulb and import that JFrame. The visual designer just avoids the imports by just making the line of code a little longer, but that is exactly the same code. So now Graphics 2 is a JFrame. Now I'll write a constructor. Public Graphics 2. And what I'm trying to do is mimic the constructor here, but I obviously won't have this part of it. But I will have this, so I'm just going to copy and paste that over to here. So now Graphics 2 is a JFrame, and it should become visible. So now when I go back to Learn Graphics, I'm going to make not only a Graphics 1 appear on the screen, but a Graphics 2 appear on the screen. The difference with Graphics 2 is I'm not using the visual designer. I'm writing all the code. So let's see if both of those can now appear on the screen. There's Graphics 1 right here. And here's Graphics 2. It obviously doesn't have any of the stuff yet that Graphics 1 does, but at least it's a JFrame. It's this frame that I can potentially manipulate and put things into it. All right. So everything I can do with a visual designer, I can also do by just coding it all myself. That's obviously a lot more work, but it's entirely possible. All right, so I got Graphics 1, I got Graphics 2. Could I try to mimic some of the stuff that this init components thing does? Well, I certainly could. I certainly could go inside that hidden code and essentially find the same sort of ways to do it. But I'm going to do that with Graphics 2, but I'm going to do it a slightly different way. I'm going to do it more myself. So in Graphics 2, I'm going to start by creating some global variables. This could also be called properties of this class. So I'm going to make a private JLabel for text. Okay? A JLabel isn't part of this class yet until I import it. So I'm going to do that. Add import. So now I have an import for a frame and an import for a label. If you're wondering, did the visual designer do something like this in Graphics 1? Well, if you go down to the bottom of Graphics 1, here you'll see a label being created, It just didn't bother with the import. It just wrote the line of code a little bit longer. So yeah, it's doing the same thing. I'm going to make a second JLabel. This one will be for a picture. I'm going to make a private JButton called button and a private JText field called a text box. And these two things, a JButton and a JText field, I'm going to import them. Add import, add import. Now, I don't have to do this. I could have also just done this using the Visual Designer or some mix of the two things, okay? Let me add a few comments to these things as well. Okay, so a label can be for text or images or both. A button is a button you click on, or in C# they called it a command button. Text field is the same as a text box. And there are other ways other than JLabels to show images, but that's the way I'm going to go with. All right, so now I got graphics 2. So I'm going to set this as my default constructor. The constructor sets up the class properties, right? So these things, these 4 controls that I created, I'm going to set those up, okay? And I'm going to do that with a couple methods. I'm going to set my container first. Then I'm going to set my controls. And then I'm going to set my actions. Now, we haven't done anything with that yet. So I'm just going to comment that out for now. That might actually go into tomorrow's video. We'll see how the time goes here. Okay? Now, I'm going to create these methods, but just a reminder from our methods unit, you don't have to write these methods if you want. You can have NetBeans automate it by just kind of doing the light bulb thing, okay? Or you can see there the Alt-Shift-M allows you to create methods as well. It's another way to make methods. Then the code we already put in here, the setVisibleTrue code, I reveal the design to my user. That line, setVisibleTrue, should basically be your last line if you think about it. You make things and then you show the user. Okay, but now I'm going to make these 2 methods. setContainer, so I'll use my light bulb. Create method setContainer. Create method setControls. So they don't do anything yet. If I run this, it's not like I get to see those text boxes and buttons and stuff. The methods are still empty, so this JFrame still is alone, unlike this one. But it's ready to go. I can now set a container and then set the controls. Let's start with setting the container up. How do I do that? Well, I'm going to do something that we did in the classes unit. I'm going to use a reference to the object that's created in the future by using the keyword this. And I'm going to say, for example, this, because what is this? This is a graphics 2. But this graphics 2 is a JFrame. So because it's a JFrame, this thing has built-in methods, lots of them, including the ability for me to set the size of this thing. So I don't know what the size is. I'm just going to put 500, 500. And now when I run this, that also occurs. So now I don't have to stretch it out. It's got a size. Now 500 by 500 was a little big, but whatever, we'll go with that. Okay. This dot set title. This will be fun. I'm going to call this thing graphics 2. So now I'll run that. Notice graphics 2 has a title at the top. Ooh, I don't have a title at the top of graphics 1. How would I be able to do that? Well, I could write code into graphics 1, or if I just want to use the designer, then I need to figure out what property that is. So I would select my frame, and oh, look at that. There's a title property right there waiting for me to type something in if I wanted to. Graphics, I'm going to use words. Graphics 1 right there. Versus in graphics 2, I'm using code to do it. Both work. You can use the designer and the properties window, or you can write your own code, whatever works. That's what I would call the hybrid approach. So let's see if that worked. So graphics 2 has a title. There it is. And now graphics 1 has a title. They both have a title. One I use the designer and the properties window. The other one I just use code for. I'm giving you lots of options for ways you could do this. All right, let's write another line to this. This dot set resizable. False. What did that just do? Well, what it did is for graphics 2, I can no longer maximize it and I can no longer stretch it out. Whereas back here in graphics 1, I can resize it and I can stretch it out. So what if I wanted to do that on graphics 1? I could search through and see if I could find some property that makes that work. Like, okay, gotta look through the properties window in more detail. Look through, I could do an internet search. Could I, oh look, here's something called resizable, and right now it's checked off. So if I uncheck that, would that essentially do the same thing? And the answer is yes. Now I can't resize this one either. So sometimes that properties window might actually be a little bit harder to search through. So maybe it might be better to actually use the code rather than search through the properties window. Oh, let's keep going. This dot set location relative to null. What am I doing with that one? How about one more? This dot set default close operation exit on close. Wow, what is all this stuff? Well, let me start with the last one first. That means when you close this form, everything closes. Because before I put this line in, you may not have noticed this, but if I go and close graphics 2, graphics 1 keeps going. So even though I close graphics 2, graphics 1 is still going. But if I rerun this, and I leave graphics 2 sitting up there, and I close graphics 1, everything shuts down. Now with this line active, exit on close, now graphics 2 does what graphics 1 does. When I close down graphics 2, everything closes down. Now I don't have to do that. There are other things I could do with it. As far as the line before that, the this dot set location relative to null, what that was actually doing, and I'm just about to put a comment in on that, you may have noticed it centers graphics 2 in the middle of the screen. So if you're wondering, how could I do that? How could I have a form in the center of the screen? Well, that's the line of code that did it. Okay, so I'm just giving you a lot of options here. All right, my container's all set up. Now it's time for me to set up my controls. Now, for those who are sitting in my classroom right now, we're getting very close to the bell. So I might actually carry this video over just past the bell, just to finish up the last piece of content I'm working on. But then the video will get uploaded to my website. So in case the bell goes off in the middle of this video, have a good evening, everybody, because I'm recording. Anyways, let's get to setting the controls up now. All right. So this would be the equivalent of me making that label, button, text box, and picture, which is a label, appear on my container. So how would I do this? This is a little tricky. So there's a couple different parts to this. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to create or instantiate those objects. So for example, our label will be made into a new label. Our button will be made into a new button, etc. Once they're made, once they're created, once they're instantiated, then I can change their properties. So for example, with a label, I might change what text is in there. With the button, I might change the text. With one of the labels, I'm going to put a picture in there. So some of those will be a little more complicated. Then this is something weird, but I'm going to set what's called the layout manager, which helps me position all the controls. So I want to put things in different spots. Then I'm going to put the controls into the container. So in other words, I'm going to put the label inside of the JFrame. And then finally, this seems like a weird thing to do last, but that's the order of operations here. I'm going to position all my objects. So I'm going to say this label goes here and it's this size. This button goes here and it's this size. It's a little noisy in here as these students filter out. They have no respect for this video process. None. Anyways, that's fine. Okay, so let's start with creating these things. I'm going to optimize this code. This is really simple. Text equals new JLabel. Button equals new JButton. Text box equals new text field. Picture equals new JLabel. I'm calling the constructor methods. Now, to change properties. Text. That's my JLabel just for text. Dot. Set text. Hello world. I'm just going to focus on the one thing for now. That one label. I want just one thing to appear. Okay? This is the tricky part, the setting the layout stuff. So I'm going to copy and paste this code and kind of give you a feel for how it's going to work. I'm going to create a container by using a method called getContentPane. Stored from this JFrame, I get the content pane. That's the method we use to get a container. Container has to be imported. Once I have the container, I set it to what's called null, which means I get to position everything myself. This is not the only way to do it. You can look at the longer set of notes on graphics to see other ways to set positions. Or you can not code any of this and use the designer to do this. Okay, now I'm going to add them. This is easy. Container. That's the name of this thing I just created, container. Dot add, and I can add my text. What this essentially does, if you look at it from the visual side, is I just said, put this label into this frame. That's what I'm doing here, okay? And then what I'm going to do next, and finally, is I'm going to take that text, and I'm going to set its position. What I'm going to use a method called SetBounds, which, try that again. As you can see, SetBounds, this weird method, moves and resizes based on an X, Y, so it knows where to put it, and a width and a height, so it knows how big to make it. So I'm going to set the bounds to, and I don't know what it's going to be. I'm just going to use 10, 10, 100, 100. And let's see what that does. I'm going to run it. Let's take a look at what Graphics 2 now does versus Graphics 1. So in Graphics 2, it's at least created a label at a position and a width and a height. Now, it's not a perfect mimicking of Graphics 1. We did more with Graphics 1, but at least the label appears, okay? Let me try changing up a little bit of the numbers here. 10, 10, and even with the set size I did here, I used 680 and 830. So I changed it to two numbers. So how about I change these numbers to 650 and 20? Okay. All right, let's see what that does. Oh, I put 200. That's the wrong number. Try it again. Okay, so that did a better job of putting that label close to the top at least. Okay, now let's go and do other things. So we created a text JLabel. We set its text. We then set up a container, added the text into the container, and positioned it. Let's now create, we've already created the button. Let's change something about the button. Okay, so, okay, button dot set text to be, I'm going to try and mimic the button on graphics 1. I'll make it say the word exit. Okay. Let's add the button to the container. So add our button. Let's position our button. So the same way we position the label, let's position our button the same way, but obviously I'm going to change up the numbers now. So for my button, maybe I'm going to put it at 1050, okay? Make it 650 and make it 40 pixels high. And let's see what that does. So now I got a button there, okay? And I've positioned it and sized it according to the code I just wrote. So at least I got a label and a button now. All right, now our text box. Let's do that next. Text, well, actually we don't really need to set any properties for the text box. It doesn't have any text in it. If you look at here, it doesn't need any text in it. So let's not bother with that. Let's just add it. So let's add our text box. But we got to position it. So let's go to our text box. And okay, what would we make it for a size? Well, like the button, I want it to be not at spot 50, but it's got to be underneath the button. So 20 and 40. Ooh, I'm not sure where I'm going to put it. How about at spot 70? So I'm kind of adding this. 20 plus 40 is 60. Add another 10 pixels. I can make it 650 wide. That's fine. But maybe I'll make it a little smaller than the button. I'll make it 20 pixels high. Let's kind of see how that plays out. That's not bad. It's too close. It's too close to the button. So that 70 I put there wasn't enough. Let's move that up to 90. Let's see what that does. Add another 20 pixels to where it's being drawn. Pretty good, but it's still too close. Let's add another 10 pixels. Let's make it 100. Sometimes with this, it's a little bit of guess and check, right? To kind of see how it goes. There we go. That looks pretty good. The text box, like over here, is right under the button. Okay, looking good. All right. Finally, the one that's going to take a little more work. Let's do the picture with the image of the picture. Okay. We need to, why not just take the code right out of our designer? So this is an example of what you could do to use the designer to help you get some of these properties. Because the designer already did the work. It already added a GIF in here. So why don't I just sort of dig into its code, look through its generated code where it looks like it's doing it right on this line right here. It's finding that giphy.gif. So I could literally steal that line of code, take it over to here, put it in there. I'm not sure what this is about. I don't know why the designer puts that in there. I could, instead of doing such a long line of code like this, I could import image icon. Instead of JLabel 2, I called it picture. And instead of just putting this text directly here, maybe I'll make a little piece of code for that. Say final string file equals that. And then I can just put the word file right here, just to shorten that line of code up. But yeah, it's the exact same line of code from the designer. Okay, so now I gotta still do this stuff. I gotta add my picture to my container. And I gotta position it. So just like I did this, I gotta position the picture. Now the picture's obviously quite a bit bigger, okay? So I'll start by putting it at spot 110. Maybe I'll make it 650 by 100 pixels tall. So it's got to be quite a bit taller. So it's there, but I got to, first of all, move it down quite a bit more. And it's wide enough. Is it tall enough? Maybe it's just not tall enough. Maybe 100 pixels isn't big enough. So I could actually go in here and look for kind of how it positions that, but it could be tricky figuring out the code on how NetBeans kind of does that positioning. Like, how does it do that kind of stuff? So that might not be the best way to do it. So it might be that guess and check is the best way to do this. Maybe I'll make this 650 by 650. That might stretch beyond the edge of the form, but it might be a good place to start with this thing. Okay, there, it's there, okay? The picture's on my form, but at least it's there. So I've mimicked basically a lot of the same code I did with the designer by just writing the same code myself. It's not perfect, but at least it's giving me kind of a way to lay out the controls on my container. All right. So what I've shown you is the ability to build a design using purely the designer. I literally only wrote one line of code to make it visible, okay? Or I could write all the lines of code myself, okay? Which I'm going to now put here, okay? Making a container with controls inside of it, using inheritance, properties and methods, and writing all the code myself instead of that. This would maybe require me to do some imports rather than let it do it for me. I would have to create all the code. I would maybe set up my methods and stuff like that to do that, okay? But it still works the same as the code I use the designer for. So it gives you the option of jumping back and forth from one to the other. There's one other thing I wanted to show. Just one other quick thing. And that is, where is it? You know what? I'll put it into the next video. I'm going to run this video off for today. This video, like the other one, will be at various places on my website. For those of you in my class right now, you know exactly where it is. If you're watching this video at a later date, you'll maybe have to look for it a little bit. But this crash course video, part 2, will be done for today.